They say your life flashes before your eyes when you die. They're wrong. You just see the face of the person who's killing you. For me, it was my own daughter's face. They didn't use a weapon. They used a bucket of cement and a steel door. They buried me alive in my own home to steal my life, my name, my future. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They forgot I was still breathing. Down here in the dark, a ghost is learning how to fight back. And I promise you, you don't want to miss the moment I walk back into the light. To see how a dead woman reclaims her world, make sure you follow my story, hit that like button, and ring that notification bell. Because the silence is about to break, and the dead have so much to say. My world ended not with a bang, but with the scrape of a trowel against concrete. The sound was methodical, rhythmic, obscene. It was the sound of my daughter, Amelia, and her husband, Mark, entombing me. It was the summer of 2015, in our sprawling house in Pasadena, California, a house that had been my sanctuary and was now my sepulcher. It had started with a smile, Amelia's smile, the one she used when she wanted something. It was a beautiful smile, practiced, polished. But for years I'd seen the cold calculation behind it. "Mother," she'd said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "There's a strange smell in the wine cellar. Mark thinks a pipe might have burst." I, of course, believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my daughter. I followed them down the sturdy oak staircase into the basement, a space I'd had finished years ago. It wasn't some dusty, spider-webbed crypt. It was a comfortable, carpeted room with a small bar, a vintage pinball machine my late husband Richard had insisted on, and deep shelves meant for aging wine. It was a room for laughter, for parties. It was now to be my prison. I walked towards the far wall, sniffing the air for the phantom leak. "I don't smell anything, dear," I said, turning back. But they weren't behind me. They were standing in the doorway, their faces unreadable masks. And then I saw it, the glint of the new, heavy-duty deadbolt on the outside of the steel-reinforced door Richard had installed for security. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, flooded my stomach. "Amelia! What's going on?" Amelia wouldn't meet my eyes. She looked at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. It was Mark who spoke, his voice as smooth and slick as his expensive hair gel. "We're sorry, Chloe. It's come to this." My gaze snapped to Amelia. "Amelia, open this door." She finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't malice, not exactly. It was a chilling emptiness, a void where love was supposed to be. "It's for the best, Mother," she said, her voice quiet, final. "You're not well. You've become difficult." Difficult. That was the word they used, because I'd refused to sign over the house. This house, the last piece of my life that wasn't tainted by Richard's controlling legacy, the one thing that was truly mine. He had controlled me in life, and now, my daughter, his perfect apprentice, was finishing the job in his absence. The heavy door slammed shut. The sound echoed in the sudden profound darkness, a click. The definitive metallic sound of the deadbolt sliding home. Panic, primal and suffocating, seized me. I threw myself against the door, my palms stinging against the cold steel. "Amelia! Mark! Let me out! This isn't funny! Let me out!" My voice was a raw, useless thing against the thick metal. And then came the other sound, the scrape. A wet, dragging noise. Slap, scrape, slap. I pressed my ear to the door, my mind refusing to process what my ears were telling me. Cement. They were cementing the door from the outside. A scream tore from my throat, a sound of pure animal terror. I pounded on the door, again and again, my knuckles splitting, my fists becoming a bloody pulp against the unyielding steel. "No! Please! Amelia, my baby, please!" I screamed until my throat was shredded and raw, until all that came out was a dry, ragged gasp. I could hear their muffled footsteps moving away. The scraping sound faded, replaced by the thrum of the central air conditioning kicking on somewhere above me. Then, nothing. An absolute, terrifying silence. A silence so complete, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me, filling my lungs, my ears, my soul. My prison was large, comfortable even. It had a small bathroom, a remnant of the renovation. But it was a tomb with carpeting. That first night I didn't sleep. I sat on the cold floor, my back against the sealed door, and I listened. I listened to the house above me settle, the groans of the wood and pipes like the sighs of a great beast whose heart no longer beat for me. I heard their footsteps overhead, the distant melody of the television, the clink of glasses. They were having a drink, celebrating. I closed my eyes, and the darkness inside me was deeper than the darkness of the room. My world had ended. 2 years, 730 days, or was it 731? In the windowless dark, time loses all meaning. It becomes a thick, stagnant thing, like the dusty air I breathed. My life became a cycle of waking, eating, and despairing. I found a forgotten stash of canned goods on a high shelf. Peaches, beans, tuna, remnants of a long-abandoned earthquake kit. I rationed them with the discipline of a soldier. I drank water from the small bathroom tap. I was a ghost haunting my own foundation, a creature of dust and shadow. My mind began to fray at the edges. I held long, detailed conversations with Richard, yelling at a ghost who couldn't hear me, finally saying all the things I was too afraid to say when he was alive. And I paced the perimeter of the room, my path worn into the plush carpet like a track in a zoo enclosure. I lost weight until my skin hung on my bones and my hair grew long and matted. I was forgetting the sound of my own voice. Some days the silence was so loud it was all I could hear. I was withering, a plant forgotten in a closet, and a part of me, a small, tired part, was ready to let go. And then, a sound. A sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the groan of the house or the hum of the pipes. It was a scrape. A small, furtive scrape from the far wall. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. It came from the old laundry chute, a brass-doored dumbwaiter Richard had installed to send laundry from the upstairs hall directly to the basement utility room. We had never used it. It was a relic of his obsession with convenience. My breath hitched. I crept towards the sound, my bare feet silent on the carpet. The scraping continued, insistent. Was it a rat? Had I finally, truly lost my mind? The small brass door, not much bigger than a dinner plate, creaked open a few inches. I held my breath, and then a small hand, impossibly small, pushed through the gap. It held a granola bar and a plastic bottle of water. Tears, hot and sudden, streamed down my face. I hadn't cried in over a year. I stumbled forward and took the offerings with a trembling hand. A whisper, a child's high-pitched, nervous whisper, snaked down the chute. "Grandma?" It was Liam, my grandson. He was only 10 years old. He was supposed to be a world away, living a happy life, not whispering into the guts of a house that had swallowed his grandmother whole. "Liam," I croaked, my voice a stranger's, rusty from disuse. "Oh, Liam." He told me later, in hurried, whispered sessions, how he'd found me. He'd been hiding in the upstairs linen closet during one of his parents' screaming matches, arguments that had become more and more frequent, he said. Huddled amongst the towels, he'd heard a sound from below, a faint, rhythmic weeping. My weeping. He had followed the sound to the chute, and with a child's curiosity, had pried open the door that his parents had told him was painted shut. He became my secret, my savior, my lifeline. He was the first crack of light in an endless night. Over the next 8 years, Liam was my only connection to the living world. He was my keeper. The granola bar became a steady, if meager, supply of food. Sandwiches snuck from the kitchen, bruised apples, bags of chips. He brought me blankets when the winter cold seeped through the concrete. He brought me books from the school library, their pages a passport to other worlds, a vital defense against the encroaching madness. He smuggled down batteries for an old emergency radio I'd found, and I would spend hours with it pressed to my ear. The static-filled voices of newscasters and DJs a holy chorus, proof that the world outside still existed. And we communicated in whispers through the chute. Our conversations were the anchor of my sanity. I watched him grow up through those whispered dispatches. I heard his voice change, cracking and deepening from a boy's clear pipe to a young man's uncertain baritone. "I got an A on my history paper, Grandma," he'd whisper, his voice buzzing with pride. I'd listen, offering praise, asking questions, my mind sharp and engaged for the first time in years. She was talking about her dad's old partner, some guy who went bankrupt. She called him a loser, he'd confide, telling me about a girl in his class he liked. I would give him advice, drawing on a lifetime of experience I thought had been rendered useless. He told me about his parents. Their fights grew worse. Mark had lost a lot of money on a bad investment. Amelia was drinking more. They were rarely home at the same time. The grand Pasadena house had become a cold, gilded cage for him, too. He told me he hated it there. "They don't even talk to me," he said one night, his voice thick with a teenager's pain. "It's like I'm a piece of furniture, except when they want to yell at me about my grades." In that dark, musty space, I became his confidant, his only real family. He saved my body, and I, in turn, tried to save his spirit from the poison of his parents. I was his secret, and he was mine. He was the only reason I didn't let the darkness consume me. He was the only reason I clung to the hope of one day feeling the sun on my face again. Every scraped-together sandwich, every whispered story, was a brick in the foundation of my will to live. I was no longer just a prisoner. I was a grandmother. I had a purpose. I had to survive for Liam. It is now 2025. Or so Liam tells me. A decade spent in this room. Liam is 20 years old, a freshman at UCLA, living on campus but coming home on weekends, ostensibly to do his laundry, but really to see me. He is a man now. I see it in the set of his shoulders when he crouches by the chute, hear it in the confident timbre of his voice. One Saturday, his whisper is different. It's urgent, laced with a new kind of tension. "Grandma," he says, "I'm bringing you something. It's risky. Mom and Mark installed a new security system. It tracks all the Wi-Fi connections, but I found a workaround. You need to see. You need to know everything." A few minutes later, a slim, cold object slides through the chute, followed by a small, heavy brick, a smartphone and a portable charger. I hold it in my hands, this artifact from a future I was never meant to see. The screen glows to life under my touch, an impossibly bright rectangle in my world of shadows. My fingers, clumsy and unaccustomed, tremble as I type. "What do I do?" I whisper, my voice shaky. "Just search your name," Liam says from above. "Chloe Carmichael." My heart feels like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I type the letters slowly. CHLOE. The search results populate instantly, news articles, social media profiles, and the first link from a local Pasadena newspaper site. My breath catches in my throat. The headline reads, "Pasadena philanthropist Chloe Carmichael passes away at 67. The date is October 31st, 2017. 2 years after they locked me in here. I click the link. A picture of me, taken years ago at a garden party, smiles out from the screen. I read my own obituary. Chloe Carmichael, beloved wife of the late Richard Carmichael, passed away peacefully at her home after a long and courageous battle with a degenerative neurological illness. The lies are so neat, so plausible. She is survived by her devoted daughter, Amelia, and her son-in-law, Mark, who were by her side until the very end. A wave of nausea rolls over me. It's a lie so monstrous, so complete, it's almost a work of art. "Liam," I choke out. "How?" His voice is low and grim. "They found someone, Grandma. A distant cousin of yours from back east. She was sick, really sick, and she looked a lot like you. They brought her here, told the few people who asked that your illness had changed your appearance, made you confused. They paid for her medical care, let her live in your bedroom, and they waited for her to die. They didn't just lock me away. They replaced me. They hired an understudy to die in my place, a sick, vulnerable woman they used as a pawn to legitimize their theft. The house, the estate, the Carmichael fortune built on my family's money, not Richard's. It all passed seamlessly to my devoted daughter. The inheritance was legal. The death certificate was real. As far as the world was concerned, I was dust. "There's more," Liam says, his voice pained. "You need to see her Instagram." He guides me through the search. I find her account easily. Amelia Carmichael Sloan. Her profile picture is a glowing selfie, taken in my rose garden, the one I spent 30 years cultivating. She's wearing my sapphire necklace, the one my father gave me, a constellation of deep blue stars against her skin. Her bio reads, CEO of Carmichael Properties, philanthropist, proud wife, honoring my parents' incredible legacy. The hypocrisy is a physical blow. It winds me, leaves me gasping for air in the stale, recycled darkness. I start scrolling, post after post of a life stolen from me. There she is, clinking champagne glasses at a fundraiser for a women's shelter, the caption full of empty platitudes about female empowerment. There's Mark, standing beside a new black Mercedes in the driveway, grinning, with the caption, "Hard work pays off." There are pictures of lavish parties in my home, my furniture rearranged, my paintings on the walls serving as a backdrop for their parade of smiling, wealthy friends. They've redecorated my living room in cold shades of gray and chrome, erasing every trace of my warmth. I see a video from Amelia's last birthday. She's blowing out the candles on a cake, surrounded by people, laughing. She looks happy, genuinely, radiantly happy. There is no trace of grief, no shadow of the monstrous secret she keeps beneath her feet. In that moment, watching her laugh in my house, on my money, in my life, something inside me shifts. The fear that has been my constant companion for a decade, the fear of the dark, the fear of dying alone, the fear of being forgotten. It doesn't just fade, it burns away, consumed by a fire I didn't know I possessed. The profound, heart-wrenching sorrow I felt for the daughter I had lost evaporates, replaced by something else, something cold, hard, and razor-sharp. It is the ice-cold clarity of pure, unadulterated rage. Seeing her smiling face, not just living but thriving on the lie of my death, doesn't just break my heart. It forges it into a weapon. The frightened, weeping woman who was dragged into this basement 10 years ago, the ghost who survived on scraps and whispers, is gone. She died right there, staring at the glowing screen of a stolen future. In her place, a strategist was born. My home was not a tomb anymore. It was a command center, and the war was just beginning. The rage didn't come as a fire. It came as ice, a slow-forming, crystalline certainty that froze the frantic, scurrying fear in my veins and replaced it with a quiet, focused energy. The grief for the daughter I thought I knew was a luxury I could no longer afford. The woman upstairs, the one who had walled me in, was not my child. She was my jailer. And a jailer only understands the language of cages. The darkness, once a suffocating blanket, became my collaborator. The silence, once a torment, became the space where I could think. One night, the smell of rain-soaked earth drifting from some unknown crack in the foundation sharpened my mind. I pressed my mouth to the cold metal of the food chute, my voice a dry rasp, a conspirator's whisper. "Liam," I breathed, praying the sound would carry. "Liam, are you there?" A faint rustle from above, then his hushed voice, a lifeline in the abyss. "I'm here, Grandma. What is it?" "I need you to listen very carefully. No questions until I'm finished. In your grandfather's study. Do you know it? The one they never use? With all the old books?" "Yes, that one. On the west wall, there's a large bookshelf, dark walnut. Your grandfather built it himself. He was proud of his secrets. The third shelf from the bottom, all the way to the right. There's a set of leather-bound encyclopedias. They're dummies. The entire back panel of that section is false. You have to push on the top left corner, hard. It will click open. Inside there should be a long cardboard tube sealed with wax." I paused, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was asking a 20-year-old boy to commit an act of espionage in his own home. "Grandma, what's in the tube?" His voice was tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. "The original blueprints of this house," I said, the words feeling powerful on my tongue. "Your grandfather was a brilliant architect, Liam, but he was also a deeply paranoid man. He believed everyone was trying to steal his genius. I was his silent partner. He would sketch the broad strokes, the grand, egotistical gestures. I was the one who made them work. I drew the lines that turned his fantasies into functioning structures. I knew every joist, every hidden cavity, every mistake he papered over. I know this house better than I know my own body. The house is the crime scene, Liam. And now, it will be our weapon. The silence on the other end was profound. I imagined him, standing in the sterile, brightly lit kitchen, a world away from my subterranean gloom. I imagined the weight of my request settling on his young shoulders. "Okay," he finally whispered. "Okay, Grandma. The bookshelf. I'll do it tonight, after they're asleep." The hours that followed were the longest of my 10-year captivity. Every creak of the floorboards above was Mark's heavy footstep. Every distant hum was Amelia on the phone, laughing, living her stolen life. I sat with my back against the damp concrete, tracing the lines of the house in my mind, refamiliarizing myself with its bones. Richard had designed it to be a fortress for his ego. I would turn it into a tomb for their lies. It was nearly dawn when I heard the faintest scratching at the chute. A small rolled-up piece of paper fell through, tied with a thread from his sock. I fumbled for it in the dark, my fingers trembling as I untied the knot. I didn't need light to read it. I knew what it would say. I held the smooth, crisp paper, the ghost of a blueprint, and felt the first tremor of power. Over the next few weeks, the cellar transformed from a prison into a war room. Liam would bring me pages he'd photographed with the phone, and I would study them, my memory filling in the gaps. We spoke in code, in whispers, through the chute and the glowing screen of the phone. The blueprints became our sacred text. "Look here," I'd murmur into the phone, my finger tracing a line on the screen that Liam couldn't see. Section C7. Richard was obsessed with the Prohibition era. He saw it as a time of clever secrets. He built a small cellar exit behind the main wine rack. It was a vanity project. He used to boast that he could get a case of bootleg whiskey in without anyone knowing. It was sealed with brick and plaster in the 80s when the city codes changed. But the tunnel, Liam, the tunnel to the old storm drain system, should still be there. They would never think to look for it. Liam was my eyes, my hands. He confirmed its existence with a small probe camera he'd bought online, snaking it behind the heavy oak rack. "It's there, Grandma. It's exactly like you said. Bricked up, but the space behind it is hollow." Escape was no longer a frantic dream. It was a logistical problem, a matter of engineering. But freedom was only half the equation. Vengeance was the other. "Liam," I said one night, my voice low and steady. "There's something else. In the same secret compartment as the blueprints. Did you see a set of black leather-bound books? They look like journals." "Yeah, I saw them. I left them there. I was scared to take too much at once." "I need them. Those are not journals. They are your grandfather's real ledgers, the ones he kept off the books. He trusted paper more than he trusted people, and he trusted his own secret hiding places most of all. He taught Amelia that every dollar has a story. I'm going to find out what story my money has been telling." I was no longer just a prisoner planning to escape. I was the architect of their downfall, and I was laying the foundation, brick by painstaking brick. As I studied the financial schematics their lives were built on, the ghost of their architect began to haunt me. Planning their destruction dredged up the memories of my own. The darkness of the cellar became a projection screen for the past, and Richard's face, with its thin, dismissive smile, was the star of the show. I remembered the evening he unveiled the design for the Pasadena Civic Auditorium expansion. We were at a gala, surrounded by the city's elite. He stood at the podium, basking in the applause, describing the innovative acoustic baffling system, the elegant flow of the public spaces, my ideas, every single one of them. I had sketched them out on napkins in our kitchen, whispering them to him late at night when his own inspiration had run dry. I had solved the structural problems that had stumped his entire firm. Standing by the bar, holding a glass of champagne I couldn't drink, I watched him accept the accolades. Later, when a councilman praised the design to me, Richard had laughed, patting my arm. "Chloe is my muse," he'd said, the words dripping with condescension. "She has a wonderful, simplistic way of looking at things that helps me clear my head." He dismissed me in public, then cashed the check on my genius in private. I had stood there and smiled, the good wife, the silent partner. The foundation of my own prison was laid long before Amelia brought the cement. And Amelia? She was always watching. Richard cultivated her like a prize orchid, carefully nurturing the traits he valued and pruning the ones he despised. I remembered one afternoon, Amelia was about 16, agonizing over a school project. She was frustrated, close to tears. I sat with her, telling her it was okay to be imperfect, that the effort was what mattered. Richard walked in, saw her distress, and scoffed. "Tears don't build empires, Amelia," he'd said, his voice cold. He looked from her to me, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. "Don't listen to your mother. Her softness is a liability. You have my blood. You're a predator, not prey. Take what you want. That's the only rule that matters." He pitted her against me, a quiet, constant campaign. He praised her ambition, her ruthlessness, her killer instinct. He criticized my empathy, my patience, my softness. Amelia grew up in a house where love was never a gift, always a transaction. Strength wasn't resilience, it was dominance. She watched me endure Richard's casual cruelties, his public humiliations, his emotional thefts, and she didn't see my strength in surviving him. She saw weakness in my staying. She mistook my fortitude for foolishness. The phone in my hand, glowing with the numbers from Richard's secret ledgers, suddenly felt heavier. I understood. Amelia didn't just want the house, the money, the life of luxury. She wanted to prove to the ghost of her father that she had learned his lesson. She was exorcising my softness by entombing it in the cellar. She was proving to him, wherever he was, that she was the strong one, the true heir to his loveless, ruthless legacy. This terrible clarity didn't bring forgiveness. It brought a profound, chilling focus. Understanding her brokenness didn't absolve her of the pieces she had chosen to break in me. The memory of her standing silently by as her father belittled me, her teenage face a mask of calculated neutrality, now felt like a prophecy. She wasn't just his victim. She was his most dedicated apprentice. And the final lesson was about to begin. My revenge, so elegantly designed on paper, hit a wall. Not brick and mortar, but a shimmering, impenetrable wall of code. Mark, it turned out, was more than just Amelia's handsome, greedy husband. He was a digital dragon, guarding their stolen treasure. "I can't get in, Grandma." Liam's voice crackled through the phone, tight with a frustration that echoed my own. "It's not just a password, it's a fortress. The whole house is wired to a central server in the office. Everything is encrypted with military-grade software. The financials, the security logs, everything. I've tried everything I can think of. Brute force attacks, password crackers. Nothing works. If I try too many times, it'll lock me out and alert them. We're blind." I closed my eyes. The darkness in the cellar felt different now. It was no longer a space for thought, but a cage within a cage. Mark had built a digital version of my prison around the evidence we needed. I could almost hear Richard laughing, a dry, spectral chuckle. He would have admired Mark's thoroughness, his technological paranoia, but he also would have seen it as inferior to his own brand of security, which was rooted not in technology but in the twisted, predictable corridors of the human ego. Specifically, his ego. Mark was just the guard, Richard was the architect, and Amelia was the key. "Liam," I said, my voice calm. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to push past the panic. "Stop trying to break the lock. Think about the person who commissioned it. Mark set it up. No, he installed it, but Amelia lives with it. And before Amelia, there was Richard. Mark is a technician. Richard was a psychologist of cruelty. He built systems around people's vanities and fears. Mark would use an uncrackable algorithm. Richard would use a password that was emotionally resonant, something that fed the user's ego every time they typed it. I let the silence hang, letting him follow my logic. I pictured Amelia sitting at that desk, her fingers poised over the keyboard. What would Richard have deemed a worthy key to their kingdom? What phrase would simultaneously flatter her and bind her to him? "He always told her she was his legacy," I whispered, the memory tasting like ash. It was his favorite word for her, his immortal legacy. "What are you thinking, Grandma?" "It's a long shot, Liam, but it's a Richard-sized long shot. I want you to try a password. No spaces, capitalize the first letter of each word, her birthday first, the full date, 8 digits." I heard the soft clicking of keys, followed by his initials, RC, Richard Carmichael, uppercase. More clicking, a pause, and then the word, legacy. I held my breath. The cellar was utterly silent. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. For a full 10 seconds, there was nothing. I was about to speak, to tell him it was a foolish idea, when a sharp, indrawn breath hissed over the phone. "Oh my God," Liam whispered. It wasn't a whisper of triumph. It was a whisper of shock. "Grandma, I'm in." The digital wall crumbled. It was like a dam breaking. What followed was a flood of pure, unadulterated evil, downloaded in neat, orderly files. Liam, his voice trembling, became my narrator for the theater of their crimes. Bank statements. "Grandma, there are transfers. Millions, the day after the funeral, transferred from your estate accounts into a new corporation. AM Legacy Holdings. Legacy." The word was a slap in the face. "Emails," he continued, his voice hardening. "Dozens of them, between Mark and a doctor, Alistair Finch. They're discussing the rapid decline of a patient, discussing the palliative care that was administered. They're talking about the woman they hired." "And the death certificate?" I asked, my voice a dead thing. "It's here, a PDF scan, signed by Dr. Finch. Cause of death, massive coronary thrombosis. Date of death, October 26, 2017. 10 years to the day from when they planned to celebrate their success. The chilling poetry of it was not lost on me. Keep looking, Liam. What else? Contracts, real estate contracts. They've been buying up commercial properties all over downtown, using the holding company, using your money to build their own empire." He paused. "Wait, there's more. Encrypted chat logs between Amelia and Mark, from before, from 2015. He read them aloud. Cold, practical messages about the price of cement mix, arguments about the best way to soundproof the door. A final message from Mark to Amelia, sent on the day I was interred. Phase 1 complete. The legacy is ours. We had it, not just a smoking gun. We had the entire arsenal, the blueprints, the purchase orders for the bullets, and the signed confession. The digital wall hadn't just been an obstacle. It had been their vault, and they had handed us the key. In the cold, methodical march of our planning, I had forgotten about the heart. My own, and the one that beat in my daughter's chest. Liam, in his quiet diligence, became the curator of their lives, feeding me sanitized snippets of their day-to-day existence from their social media, their calendars. It was all data, evidence for our case. Until one evening, he sent me a video. "I pulled this from Mark's cloud backup," his text read. "It's from her birthday last week." I tapped the screen. The small rectangle of light flickered to life, a window into a world I couldn't reach. It was a party. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses, and in the center of it all was Amelia. Mark was holding the phone, and Liam was walking towards her, carrying a cake alight with candles. She turned, and her face broke into a wide, luminous smile. She threw her head back and laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound, as everyone began to sing. For a single, soul-shattering second, she wasn't the monster who had walled me up in the dark. She was just Amelia, my Amelia, the little girl with scraped knees who used to curl up in my lap and fall asleep to the sound of my heartbeat. The teenager who, despite her father's poison, would sometimes sneak into the kitchen late at night just to talk. The woman I had loved more than my own life. A wave of guilt, so profound it was physically sickening, washed over me. It felt like swallowing acid. My breath caught in my throat. The blueprints, the ledgers, the escape plan. It all felt like a monstrous, grotesque betrayal. This was my daughter, my child, and I was methodically, coldly plotting to destroy her, to strip her of everything, to expose her to the world, to send her to prison. What kind of mother does that? My resolve, the icy certainty that had been my shield and my sword, shattered into a million pieces. I was shaking, tears I thought had long since dried up, streaming down my face in the darkness. I grabbed the phone, my fingers fumbling on the screen. "Liam," I typed, my thumbs clumsy and slow. "I can't do this." I confessed everything in a torrent of whispered messages. The crushing guilt, the image of her smile, the sudden, overwhelming feeling that I was the villain of this story, an unnatural mother plotting against her own flesh and blood. He didn't reply for a long time. The silence stretched, filled only by the frantic thumping of my own guilty heart. I thought perhaps I had finally broken him too, that my weakness had disgusted him. Then his voice came through the phone, not a text, but a call. It was soft, but imbued with a strange, adult gravity. "Grandma," he began, "that woman in the video, laughing at her party, she isn't the mother I knew before you were gone." I listened, clutching the phone like a rosary. "When they brought the other woman home," he continued, his voice measured, "the one who was supposed to be you, she was a stranger. She was cold. Her eyes were empty. She never asked me how my day at school was. She never hugged me. She just sat in your chair watching television. And Amelia. Amelia was different with her. Polite. Distant. Like she was dealing with a business associate." He took a breath. "When that woman died, Grandma, Amelia didn't cry. Not once. Mark put his arm around her at the funeral, and she just stood there, staring straight ahead. A week later, they had a party. Not as big as this birthday one, but it was a party. They called it a celebration of life. But it felt like a closing dinner. A deal had been finalized." His next words were the ones that changed everything. They were not the words of a boy, but of a man who had been forced to see the world for what it was. "They are strangers, Grandma. They live in this house. They wear familiar faces, but they are strangers. I spent the last 8 years living with them. You whispering to me through a pipe in a wall. You are more my family than they have ever been." His words weren't a comfort. They were a surgeon's scalpel, cutting away the diseased sentimentality that was poisoning my purpose. They were a steel rod pressed against my spine, forcing it straight. He was right. The woman laughing in that video was a stranger enjoying the spoils of a successful, decade-long heist. The child I mourned was a ghost, a memory. My daughter, the real Amelia, didn't die of a massive coronary thrombosis in 2017. She died for me in 2015. She died the moment she watched Mark smooth the last layer of cement, sealing my world and her own heart in impenetrable stone. The guilt receded, burned away by the cold, clean light of truth. What remained was not rage, not even hatred. It was a simple, profound, and unshakable duty. A duty to the woman I once was, and to the boy who had refused to forget her. The final phase of the plan felt less like a strategy and more like a birth. It was the most dangerous, the most audacious, and the most necessary. Using the security credentials Liam had painstakingly extracted, we gained a god's eye view into my own home. My prison had become my command center. Liam, my loyal, brave soldier, became my hands and eyes in the world above. I talked him through it over the crackling connection of the burner phone, my voice a low whisper in the darkness, guiding him like a ghost through the labyrinth of his own childhood home. He moved with a phantom's grace, a skill born of years of practice, of sneaking food and supplies past the 2 oblivious monsters who raised him. The first camera was a smoke detector. I watched on the phone's tiny, brilliant screen as his hands, steady and sure, replaced the old one in the main foyer. The lens was a tiny, black, unblinking pupil embedded in the white plastic. It gave me a perfect, sweeping view of the grand staircase Amelia loved so much. The one she'd always said made her feel like a movie star. Now, it would be the stage for her downfall. The second camera was even more ingenious. A simple black power adapter he plugged into a low socket in the living room. It was innocuous, forgettable, one of a dozen such devices littered around a modern home. but its lens was aimed directly at the large, cream-colored sofa where they spent their evenings, where they laughed and drank wine and lived the life they had stolen from me. The feed flickered to life, and suddenly, after a decade of sound and shadow, I had sight. The darkness of my tomb was illuminated by the stolen light of their world, channeled through a 4-inch screen. I was no longer just a prisoner. I was the unseen witness, the director, the audience, and the star of this final, terrible act. The last few days before the chosen date bled into one long, continuous vigil. I barely slept. The world shrank to the glowing rectangle in my hands. I watched them. I watched my daughter, Amelia, her face fuller now, hardened by a success she hadn't earned. I watched her preen in front of the foyer mirror, adjusting a silk scarf, the same shade of blue as the one I wore on her first day of school. The memory stabbed at me, a phantom pain, but it was distant now, cauterized by a colder, more powerful emotion. I watched Mark, his hair thinning, but his arrogance as robust as ever, barking into his phone about profit margins and supply chains, pacing the very floorboards under which I sat, trapped in dust and silence. They were preparing for a party. Their voices, distorted but clear, drifted down through the vents, a constant torment. They spoke of caterers and floral arrangements, of valet parking and a string quartet. They were celebrating something called the Carmichael Legacy Towers. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. My legacy, my husband's name, a monument built on a foundation of matricide. I listened to their casual laughter, the easy intimacy of their conversation, and I felt nothing. The part of me that could have felt pain, that could have wept for the daughter I had lost, had withered and died in this cellar years ago. In its place was a cold, thrilling anticipation, a predator's patience. I was watching a nature documentary of my own making. I saw two creatures, sleek and satisfied, unaware of the trap closing around them. Liam would visit one last time each night, his face a pale moon in the small opening of the food chute. He'd bring me water, protein bars, and a fresh battery pack. We barely spoke. There was nothing left to say. Our plan was a living thing between us, and we both knew our roles. His eyes, so like his father's but filled with a kindness Mark had never possessed, would search mine. He was looking for doubt, for fear. He found none. He found only the same chilling resolve that had taken root in his own heart. On the last night, he whispered, "Are you ready, Grandma?" I looked away from the screen, from the image of Amelia trying on a glittering evening gown, and met his gaze. "I was born ready for this, my love," I whispered back. The day arrived, October 26th. 10 years to the day. A perfect, terrible symmetry. I knew it was the day without needing a calendar. A decade of darkness attunes you to the rhythms of the world in a way sunlight never can. I could feel it in the quality of the silence, in the weight of the air. Upstairs, the house began to stir with an electric hum of activity. The caterers arrived first. I watched them on my little screen, an army in white coats marching through my foyer, carrying trays of food that smelled so rich and decadent it was almost obscene. Then came the florists, filling my home with lilies and roses, funeral flowers for a life that was about to end. The music started around 7 o'clock, a low, thumping bass that vibrated through the concrete floor, a drumbeat for the execution to come. It was all over their social media, of course. Liam had shown me Instagram stories of champagne flutes and sparkling decorations, Facebook posts tagging their wealthy, influential friends. Carmichael, legacy, #building, the future, #Pasadena, power couple. They were curating their own legend, a spectacle of success for the whole world to admire. While the champagne flowed and the meaningless chatter echoed above, I began my work. Liam had brought me what I needed on his final visit, a bundle of clean clothes wrapped in plastic. I unfolded them in the gloom. It was a dress, a simple but elegant sheath of deep indigo blue. I remembered it. I had worn it to a small dinner party with my husband years before he passed, one of the last good nights we ever had. It was a relic from a different life, a different me. Putting it on felt like donning a costume. Or perhaps shedding one. The rough, stained rags I had worn for a decade fell away, and with them, the last vestiges of the victim. My skin, pale and unused to the touch of soft fabric, tingled. I ran my hands over my arms, feeling the bones close to the surface. I was thinner, weaker, but I had never felt more powerful. Then, the final tool, a heavy iron wrench. It was cold and solid in my hand, a stark piece of reality in my ethereal existence. The hidden door was at the far end of the cellar, concealed behind a stack of rotting wine crates I'd had Liam clear weeks ago. It was an old emergency exit from the original construction, one my husband had ordered sealed but never fully removed, a forgotten detail from a life of secrets. The lock was thick with a decade of rust and neglect. I wedged the teeth of the wrench around the rusted hasp. I put my whole body into it, what little strength I had. My muscles screamed. The metal groaned in protest, a sound like a dying animal. Sweat beaded on my forehead, stinging my eyes. For a moment, I faltered. My arms trembled, the wrench slipped. I leaned my head against the cold, damp stone of the wall, the party's baseline, a mocking pulse against my skull. "You can't do this. You're too weak." The voice was insidious, a ghost of the woman I used to be. Then I looked at the phone, still glowing on a nearby crate. On the screen, Mark was clinking glasses with a man I recognized as a city council member. He was laughing, his face flushed with triumph. Amelia was at his side, her hand possessively on his arm, a queen surveying her court. My court, my home, my life. A surge of pure, black rage, cold as the grave, flooded through me. It was a power source more potent than any muscle. I gripped the wrench again, my knuckles white. I set my feet, leaned back, and pulled with a strength that didn't feel like my own. There was a sharp, shrieking crack. The sound of tearing metal echoed in the small space, loud as a gunshot. The lock broke. The hasp hung loose. Defeated, I pushed. The heavy door, swollen with damp, resisted for a second and then swung inward with a low groan. And then, air. It wasn't just air. It was a physical thing, a presence. It rushed in to fill the vacuum of my tomb, cool and alive and smelling of the world. It hit my face, my skin, my lungs. I gasped, drinking it in like a dying woman finding water. It smelled of jasmine from the vines that climbed the garden wall. It smelled of damp earth and cut grass. It smelled of freedom. After 10 years of breathing nothing but stale, recycled dust and despair, the night air of Pasadena was the most intoxicating perfume I had ever known. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, my eyes closed, just breathing, letting a decade of captivity be washed out of me with every inhale. Then, I stepped out of the dark and into the night. The lawn was soft and damp beneath my bare feet. The grass, cool and wet with evening dew, tickled my skin. It was an impossibly strange sensation after a decade of concrete. I was a wraith returned to her haunting grounds, a ghost walking the manicured gardens of my own past. The house stood before me, blazing with light, every window a golden square of warmth and laughter from which I had been exiled. I could see them inside, silhouettes moving behind the large bay windows of the living room. Figures dancing, heads thrown back in laughter, hands gesturing with champagne flutes. The thumping bass of the music was louder out here, a physical pressure against my chest, the frantic, joyful heartbeat of a life I was about to stop. I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like the rightful owner returning to evict a pair of grotesque squatters. I walked slowly, deliberately, around the side of the house, my bare feet making no sound on the stone path. The path I had walked 1,000 times, coming home from the market, from a walk, from a life. Each stone was familiar, the slight dip near the rose bushes, the uneven edge by the fountain. It was all mine. I reached the front porch. The grand oak door, the one I had chosen myself, stood before me, solid and imposing. The porch light cast a warm, welcoming glow, a lie of hospitality. I could hear their voices more clearly now, snippets of conversation floating on the music-filled air. Mark's booming laugh. Amelia's high-pitched, affected giggle. I saw a couple step out onto the porch for a cigarette, their backs to me. They didn't see the shadow that had detached itself from the deeper darkness of the garden. They laughed, finished their cigarettes, and went back inside, closing the heavy door behind them, sealing themselves in with their hosts, sealing themselves in with me. I walked up the familiar stone steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. My movements were calm, unhurried. There was no tremor in my limbs, no hesitation in my heart. The cold resolve that had been my companion in the dark was now a suit of armor. I stood before the door for a moment, looking at my faint reflection in the polished brass of the knocker. A thin, pale face, eyes that were two dark pools of shadow, hair that was now more white than blonde, hanging loose around my shoulders. I did not recognize this woman, and yet I had never felt more like myself. I raised my hand. It was thin and pale, the skin almost translucent, but it was steady, rock steady. I knocked, once, a solid, definitive rap of knuckle against oak. It felt loud in the relative quiet of the porch, but it was swallowed by the party inside. I knocked again, twice this time. Harder, a commanding summons. Thud, thud. This time, the sound seemed to cut through the noise. Inside, I heard the music falter, just for a beat. A lull in the conversation. Someone had heard. I knocked a third time. 3 sharp, insistent raps. The knock of fate, the knock of the living dead. Thud, thud, thud. Silence. The music stopped completely. I saw a shape move behind the small, leaded glass peephole in the center of the door. A brief, dark flicker. They were looking, trying to see who would dare interrupt their perfect evening. I didn't move. I just stood there, bathed in the porch light, waiting to be seen. I heard the sound of bolts being drawn, the heavy click of the latch. And the door swung open. And there he was, Mark. He held a half-empty champagne flute in his hand. A self-satisfied, slightly drunken smile was plastered on his face, the smile of a man who believed he was the king of the world. His eyes, bleary from alcohol and arrogance, tried to focus on me. And then they did. The smile did not fade. It shattered. It dissolved from his face as if erased by an invisible hand, leaving behind a slack-jawed mask of pure, abject terror. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly gray. The champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers, falling to the stone porch with a delicate, explosive crash, splattering his expensive shoes with gold. He made a sound, a choked, gurgling gasp, like a man who had been punched in the gut. He stared at me, his eyes wide, pupils shrinking to pinpricks. He looked as if he had just seen a ghost, because of course he had. I said nothing. I simply held his gaze and took a single step forward, over the threshold, and into the bright, warm light of my home. The light was a physical blow. After a decade in near-total darkness, the brilliant chandeliers of my foyer were like 1,000 tiny suns exploding behind my eyes. I blinked, spots dancing in my vision, but I did not falter. I kept walking forward, into the center of the room. The party didn't just stop, it died. The low hum of chatter, the clinking of glasses, the rustle of silk and wool, it all ceased to exist in an instant. A collective audible gasp sucked the very air from the room, creating a vacuum of profound, absolute silence. Every head turned towards me. 100 pairs of eyes, belonging to the most rich and powerful people in Pasadena, were fixed on the apparition in the doorway. Confusion rippled through the crowd, followed by a wave of shocked disbelief. Phones, which had been in pockets and purses just moments before, were suddenly in every hand, their small red recording lights blinking like a field of malevolent fireflies. And then, Amelia saw me. She was standing by the grand staircase, a vision in emerald green silk, a glass of champagne held aloft as she was mid-anecdote. Her laughter died in her throat, replaced by a strangled, horrified shriek that was more animal than human. The glass dropped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. Her eyes, my eyes, locked with mine across the silent, crowded room. She saw me. She truly saw me. Not a ghost, not a memory, but flesh and blood. Her mother. The mother she had buried alive. Her perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of raw, primal fear, and with a guttural moan, her eyes rolled back in her head and she collapsed in a heap of green silk on the floor. Several people rushed to her side, but most were frozen, their attention riveted on me. Mark, recovering a fraction of his composure, finally found his voice. It was a pathetic, sputtering wreck of a sound. Who are you?" he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Security! Get her out of this house! Get out!" I ignored him. He was nothing. A fly buzzing in the periphery. My focus was on the room, on the faces staring back at me. I let my gaze sweep over the crowd, meeting the eyes of people I once called friends, people who had attended my funeral and offered my daughter their empty condolences. I was calm. The chaos swirling around me was distant, like a storm seen from behind a thick pane of glass. When I finally spoke, my voice, hoarse from a decade of disuse, was quiet. But in the cathedral-like silence of that room, it carried like a bell. "Hello, Amelia," I said, my voice resonating with a strange hollow power. I looked down at her crumpled form being tended to on the floor. "I've been away." Then, I turned my calm, unwavering gaze back to Mark. He flinched, as if I had struck him. "I believe you have something of mine," I said, my tone even, conversational. The placid delivery made the words all the more menacing. He just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I took another slow step forward, my bare feet cold on the marble. "My house, my money, my name." I paused, letting the weight of each word settle into the thick, terrified silence. "My life." Amelia was stirring now, being helped into a sitting position by two of her friends. Her face was as white as a sheet, her eyes wild with a terror so profound it was almost madness. She was shaking her head, muttering, No, it can't be. You're dead. You're dead." Her denial was the final piece I needed. It was time for the coup de grace. The one blow from which there could be no recovery. I looked directly at her, past the friends trying to soothe her, past the decades of lies and cruelty, and I reached into the deep, shared past we had once had. "Amelia," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, a cruel imitation of motherly tenderness. "Do you remember the promise you made me? When you were 7 years old, under the old oak tree in the backyard, the day you fell from the swing?" I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, a terror that went deeper than seeing a ghost. It was the terror of being truly known. "You were crying," I continued, my voice a relentless soft whisper that everyone in the room strained to hear. "You thought your arm was broken, and you made me promise. You put your small hand in mine and you said, 'Promise me you'll never leave me, Mommy, and promise me we'll never, ever have secrets from each other.'" The color, which had already drained from Amelia's face, somehow drained even further, leaving her looking like a marble statue. Her breath hitched. A low, wounded sound escaped her lips. That memory was ours. It was a tiny, sacred thing, locked away in a part of her heart she must have thought was buried as deep as I was. It was a secret no imposter could ever know, no forger could ever replicate. It was the irrefutable, undeniable truth of my existence, spoken aloud in a room full of witnesses. The entire party was watching a horror movie unfold in real time, and they had all just realized the monster was real. Amelia stared at me, her defenses utterly obliterated. In her eyes, I saw not just the collapse of a lie, but the death of a soul. The daughter I knew had died the day she sealed that door. Tonight, the woman she had become died too. The sound of Amelia's body hitting the hardwood floor was a dull, final thud in the cavernous silence. It was the sound of a puppet whose strings had been cut. For a moment, no one moved. The air was thick, crystalline, as if a single breath would shatter the world. Mark, his face a contorted mask of disbelief and pure primal fear, finally broke the spell. He lurched toward his wife, not with concern, but with the clumsy, frantic energy of a man trying to shove a monstrous truth back into its box. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering uselessly over her still form, but his eyes, wide and terrified, were locked on me. He wasn't looking at a woman. He was looking at a reckoning. A guest near the back, a woman in a shimmering silver dress, let out a choked sob. A wineglass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the polished stone of the patio, the sound unnaturally loud, a second crack in the frozen tableau. That was the signal. The dam of horrified silence broke, and a wave of whispers flooded the room. "Oh my God. Is that Chloe? I thought the funeral. What is happening? Is this a joke?" Phones began to emerge from pockets and purses, not to call for help, but to record, to capture the impossible drama unfolding before them. They were no longer guests at a party. They were the audience at an execution. I remained still, a statue carved from 10 years of darkness, standing in the doorway of a life that had been stolen from me. I watched Mark fumble with Amelia's wrist, his face turning from ashen white to a blotchy, furious red. He looked from his fainted wife to the sea of bewildered faces, and then back to me. The terror in his eyes was curdling into something else, rage, the impotent fury of a cornered rat. Through the large bay windows, I saw them, the flashing lights, painting the manicured lawns and the imported Italian marble in strobing pulses of red and blue. Someone, in their panic, had done the sensible thing. Someone had called 911. The siren grew from a distant wail to a piercing shriek that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the night. 2 police officers appeared at the grand entrance, their expressions professional, but etched with confusion. They saw a lavish party, a woman unconscious on the floor, and a crowd of Pasadena's elite, looking utterly shell-shocked. It was a scene they were prepared for, but the narrative didn't fit. The lead officer, a man with a stern face and tired eyes, stepped forward. "Can someone tell me what's going on here?" His voice cut through the murmurs, and all eyes, once again, fell on me. I didn't need to speak. Not yet. From the edge of the crowd, a figure detached himself and moved toward the center of the room. Liam. He walked with a new kind of purpose, his shoulders back, his chin high. He wasn't the hesitant boy who used to pass me scraps of food through a rusty vent. He was a man walking into his own life. He didn't look at his father, who was now scrambling to his feet, nor at his mother, who was beginning to stir with a low moan. He walked past them as if they were ghosts. His eyes found mine, and in that brief, silent exchange, a decade of shared secrets, of fear and hope, came to its conclusion. It wasn't a look of triumph. It was a look of release. A heavy, dark weight we had carried together was finally being set down. Liam stopped in front of the bewildered officer. "I can tell you what's going on," he said. His voice was perfectly clear, perfectly steady. It held no tremor, no adolescent uncertainty. It was the voice of someone who had lived with a terrible truth for so long that speaking it was as natural as breathing. "But it's better if I show you." He held up a small black flash drive, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. "I have evidence," he said, his voice resonating with an authority that stunned the room into a fresh silence. He handed the drive to the officer. "Evidence of what, son?" the officer asked, his gaze shifting from Liam to me, then to the opulent chaos of the room. "Of a crime," Liam said simply. "A 10-year-long crime." The second officer, a younger woman, took the drive. "There's a large display over there," Liam said, pointing to the enormous television screen mounted on the wall, which moments before had been showing a romantic slideshow of Amelia and Mark's lavish vacations. "You can plug it in." A strange, morbid curiosity filled the air. No one left. The guests, the business partners, the socialites. They were all rooted to the spot, prisoners of a drama far more compelling than any they could have paid to see. The officer, after a moment's hesitation and a nod from her superior, walked to the media console and inserted the drive. The screen flickered. The smiling faces of my daughter and her husband vanished. For a second, there was only blackness. Then an image appeared. It was grainy, shot from a low angle. It was the kitchen, my kitchen. Amelia and Mark were at the island, clinking champagne glasses together. The timestamp in the corner read October 26, 2017, the third anniversary of the day they sealed my tomb. "To us," Mark said on the video, his voice tinny but clear. "And to being free of that miserable old woman. Best thing that ever happened to us." Amelia laughed, a high, tinkling sound that was suddenly monstrous. "She's probably happier wherever she is," she said, taking a long, self-satisfied sip of champagne. A collective gasp went through the room. People physically recoiled. The image on the screen was damning, but it was just the beginning. The video cut out, replaced by a scanned document, a death certificate. My name, Chloe Carmichael, was printed in stark black letters. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Date of death, November 14th, 2017. A forgery, cold and official, broadcast for all to see. Then another document. A deed transfer. The house, my house, signed over to Amelia Carmichael and Mark Jennings a week after my supposed death. Then another, bank statements, a river of money, my money, flowing from my life savings into their accounts. Hundreds of thousands, millions. The screen was a waterfall of their greed, a digital accounting of their betrayal. Finally, the emails, a thread between Mark and a doctor I had never met. "Is everything arranged?" Mark's email read, "The price is, as we discussed. We need this to be clean." The doctor's reply, "The paperwork will be filed. As far as the state of California is concerned, your mother-in-law passed away peacefully in a private care facility. No one will look twice." Another from Amelia to Mark. "Are you sure this will work? What if someone finds out?" Mark's reply was the final nail. "Find out what? That a sad old woman died and left her fortune to her only daughter? It's the most natural thing in the world. No one cares, Amy. She's gone. We're free. Now, have you decided between the Maserati or the Aston Martin?" The truth was no longer a whisper from a secret past. It was a roaring inferno consuming them in front of everyone they had ever wanted to impress. The foundation of their lives, built on a lie buried in cement, was crumbling into dust. Amelia was on her knees now, her earlier faint forgotten. The carefully constructed mask of the grieving daughter, the successful heiress, the society darling, it didn't just crack, it exploded. A raw, guttural wail tore from her throat, the sound of a soul being flayed alive. It wasn't a cry of remorse, it was a cry of exposure. "No, no, it wasn't like that," she sobbed, her words a hysterical, incoherent jumble of self-pity. She clawed at the floor, her expensive gown tearing at the seams. "He made me do it. Mark, he said it was the only way. She never loved me. She always looked at me like I was a disappointment. I deserved it. It was mine." Her confession was a pathetic, gasping mess, the spoiled child emerging from the ruins of the woman. She was not crying for me. She was crying for the loss of her beautiful, hollow life. Mark was different. His breakdown was not one of tears, but of pure, venomous rage. The charming, successful facade melted away like hot wax, revealing the ugly, entitled parasite beneath. His face was purple, veins standing out on his neck like thick cords. "You!" he screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged, not at the police but towards Liam, towards his own son. The lead officer was faster, stepping in front of him, his hand on Mark's chest, shoving him back. "You little traitor!" Mark spat, struggling against the officer's grip. "I gave you everything. This house, the cars, a life your pathetic father could only dream of, and you do this? For her, a bitter old woman who is already dead to the world?" He turned his incandescent fury on me. You ghost! You should have stayed in the ground!" His words were nothing to me. They were the meaningless curses of a king whose castle had turned to sand. I stood there and watched it all, the chaos, the screaming, the flashing lights. I felt a strange, profound calm settle over me. In my darkest hours in the basement, I had imagined my revenge as a storm of fire and fury. I had pictured myself screaming, clawing, matching their violence with my own. But this was better. My revenge wasn't loud. It was silent. It was digital. It was absolute. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to lift a finger. I simply had to exist. The truth, delivered by the grandson I had saved, and who had, in turn, saved me, was the only weapon we ever needed. It didn't just defeat them. It demolished them, atom by atom, in front of the very world they had tried so desperately to conquer. The days that followed were a blur of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. The gates of my house became a permanent campsite for news vans. I was no longer an invisible woman. I was a headline. The ghost of Pasadena. Woman buried alive by daughter, returns from the dead. I was a reluctant celebrity, a morbid curiosity. Online, my story exploded. There were TikToks analyzing every detail, Twitter threads debating the psychology of my daughter, endless speculation on Facebook groups dedicated to true crime. I, who had been disconnected from the world for a decade, was now the most talked about person in it. The irony was a bitter pill. For 10 years I was screaming into a void, and now that I was silent, the entire world was screaming my name. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. Amelia and Mark faced a mountain of charges that seemed to grow by the day: aggravated kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy, forgery, elder abuse, and a dizzying array of financial crimes. Their assets were frozen. The business partners who had sipped their champagne now provided testimony against them. The society friends who had admired their wealth now spoke of them with disdain. They were pariahs. I was legally resurrected. I sat in a sterile office with a kind-faced lawyer and a prosecutor, signing papers that declared me, Chloe Carmichael, to be alive. That returned ownership of my house, my accounts, my life, to me. It felt absurd, like a bureaucratic punchline to a decade-long joke. The state of California officially acknowledged that I had not, in fact, died of a heart attack in 2017. After the media frenzy died down and the legalities were settled, I walked through the house alone. Not the basement. I would never go down there again. I walked through the sun-drenched rooms upstairs. I ran my hand over the cold marble of a countertop Amelia had installed. I looked at a vast, abstract painting she'd bought with my money, a chaotic splash of colors that meant nothing. I saw the ghost of my husband, Richard, in the stern, patriarchal study he had designed. I saw his judgment in the set of the bookshelves, his ambition in the size of the desk. And I saw Amelia everywhere. Not the monster she became, but the little girl she had been, playing on the floor where she had fainted, desperate for a word of praise from a father who only taught her that love was transactional, that worth was measured in assets. This house wasn't a home. It had never been a home. It was a museum of a hollow marriage and a corrupted childhood. The basement had been my prison cell, but the sunlit rooms upstairs had been my gilded cage long before that. The entire structure was a mausoleum, not just for the 10 years they stole from me, but for the 40 years I had lost before that, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, in a place built on a foundation of control and conditional love. Staying was impossible. Selling it wasn't a choice. It was an exorcism. I sold everything: the house, the furniture, the art, the cars, every last vestige of that life. Months passed. The chill of the Pasadena autumn gave way to the cool, clean air of a new year. The final scene of my old life did not play out in that house of horrors. It took place on the pier at Santa Monica, the world sprawling out around me, alive and noisy and real. The wooden planks vibrated under my feet with the passage of tourists and fishermen. I could smell the salt from the ocean and the sweet, greasy scent of fried dough from a nearby stand. I could hear the raucous cries of the seagulls and the gentle, rhythmic crash of waves against the pilings. These were the simple, profound sensations of freedom. Liam was with me. He stood beside me, leaning on the railing, looking out at the endless blue expanse of the Pacific. He was quieter now, the fierce purpose of that night having settled into a deep, steady calm. He was enrolled in college, studying forensic accounting. He said he wanted to be the person who found the things that powerful people tried to hide. I watched the waves roll in, one after another, washing the shore clean before receding again. "I've donated it," I said softly, my voice carried away by the breeze. Most of it, anyway. Liam looked at me, his expression unreadable. I gave it to a few charities, I continued. One that supports victims of elder abuse, another that provides resources for children growing up in toxic families. The money, it was the reason for everything, the root of it all. It felt tainted. I couldn't build a new life on it. But maybe it can help someone else, stop another family from turning into what ours did. Using the very thing that was meant to destroy me to build something good felt like the only true victory. He nodded slowly, understanding completely. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, just watching the ocean breathe. I said, my gaze fixed on the horizon, where the blue of the water met the pale blue of the sky. For 10 years, I was a prisoner in a basement. Everyone knows that part of the story. I took a deep, steadying breath, the salt air filling my lungs. But for 40 years before that, I was a prisoner in a gilded cage. A cage my husband built with his expectations and his coldness, and a cage my daughter locked from the outside with her resentment. She didn't just entomb me in 2015. She was just finishing a job her father started a long time ago. I turned to Liam, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for what felt like the first time. This, I said, gesturing to the wide-open world around us, to the endless ocean, to the simple fact of us standing there free. This is the first day of my life. I was no longer Chloe Carmichael, the victim. I wasn't the ghost of Pasadena. Those were roles, labels applied to a story that was over. The fortune was gone, the house was gone, the family that had defined and confined me was gone. All that was left was me, just Chloe. And standing there with the wind on my face and my grandson by my side, for the very first time, that was more than enough. My story is one of darkness, but it ends in the light. If you've ever felt trapped, whether by walls of cement or walls of expectation, know that there is always a way out. The first step is the hardest, deciding that you deserve to be free. What's the one small step you can take today to reclaim your own story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's remind each other that no cage is permanent.